It's been really great to watch the Canadian cheese scene grow and diversify over the past couple of decades, winning numerous accolades and awards, including a lot of international ones. As a big fan of cheese, I love incorporating it into lots of different dishes, and they're going to be featured in the 3 recipes I'm sharing with you today. Our first dish, scalloped potatoes, is something that I wanted to love as a kid, but I often found it kind of a bit bland or a bit too dry, and I just couldn't embrace them. So my solution? Add cheese, of course. I'm going to show you a great recipe today that is a personal size one, just makes one little pan, but of course you can scale it up for a larger crowd. So we're going to start by making the sauce, which includes cheese. We'll get our burner on here. And we're going to melt some butter. This is basically a white sauce or a bit of a cheese sauce, and it's a nice complement to the potatoes. When I was growing up, my mom would just sprinkle raw onions and flour and pour a little milk over them, and it ended up cooking up to a little bit of a sauce, but this one's a lot better. So while our butter melts, we're going to sprinkle a little bit of flour, and a good rule of thumb when you're making a white sauce is to have equal proportions of butter and flour. Of course, you can use non-dairy butter if that's important to you. And you want to whisk it as the butter is melting so that the flour gets fully saturated. And then you want the flour to cook in the butter for about a minute. I was told by a chef that you should be able to lean in and have it smell a little bit like the aroma of baking cookies, and then you know that the flour's cooked. If you don't leave it long enough, you're going to have a bit of a raw flour taste in your dish. All right, so we're going to let that bubble for a minute. And then I've got some chopped onion, and I like to cook it in the sauce to take away that raw flavor. Even from here, I can already smell that quasi-cookie aroma. So in go our onions, and they'll just need to cook for about a minute or so to start to soften. They'll cook further as the sauce bubbles its way along. And I'm using just regular dairy milk here, but you could absolutely use a non-dairy milk. You probably don't want a strongly flavored one like coconut or almond, but this is definitely a dish that can be made dairy-free. All right, so now the trick is to add the milk fairly slowly because you don't want to get clumps of flour. And just keep whisking the whole time. There we go. I can see that we are lump-free, so that's great. And of course, as I mentioned, my solution is to add cheese. So we're going to add in some cream cheese. You could absolutely use goat cheese or chèvre if you want a slightly more tangy flavor. I've tried it and it's really delicious. And we'll just let that melt in the sauce. And now, of course, we need to get the potatoes ready since we're making scalloped potatoes. So as I said, we're doing a single serving dish. These are really nice, for example, if you're having a steak and scalloped potatoes. So you can plate these together, have your meat, have your potatoes corralled, and it just looks really nice on the plate. So I am going to slice my potato thinly, and this medium-sized potato is pretty perfect for this size of dish. I do have a mandolin, which is great for making thin slices. A lot of people are intimidated by these. I think you'd find if you are going to do a lot of slicing, you might enjoy purchasing one and getting comfortable with it. But for this small quantity, one potato, I think I'm okay with a knife. And we're just cutting a few little bits out. Remember that the potatoes will be hiding in sauce, so they don't have to look perfect. Your goal is just to try and get even slices. I would say these are probably about 1/8 of an inch or less in thickness. And here's a tip: when you get towards the end and it's hard to keep it steady, take a slice off the bottom, and then it's going to be perfectly still on the board. You'll notice that I didn't peel the potato. I really like the texture and the flavor of the skin. If people don't prefer that, of course you can peel it. So just checking in with our sauce here. We want it to thicken a little bit before we add it to the dish. So I'm just going to pop the heat up a little bit. Our cream cheese is melting nicely. We're going to add in a little bit of Dijon mustard for flavor. My mom always put paprika in the scallop potatoes, and that's fine, but it doesn't have a lot of oomph. So Dijon is going to give it a bit more of a kick. And we'll whisk that in. Going to add a little salt and pepper. And we're going to put in some green onions. You can use chives or green onions, whatever you have on hand. If you've watched other episodes, you know I'm a big fan of green onions. They give such a nice bright flavor. And you can just keep them in the fridge and use a little bit each day. A bunch will usually last me about a week, and that's perfect. So we're going to put the green onions in the sauce, and then we will put a little bit more on top for a garnish at the end. All right, I can feel the sauce is starting to thicken up. So a lot of recipes tell you to grease the dish before you put the potatoes in it. My solution's a lot easier. I just scoop in a little bit of the sauce to coat the bottom. Just enough to keep the potatoes from sticking. So now you want to layer the potatoes in sort of a single layer at a time. It's okay if they're overlapping a little bit. And then we're going to keep adding sauce with each layer. So the sauce is ready. I'm going to turn it off. You want just enough sauce to cover the potatoes. And don't worry if it looks a little bit thin, it's going to work out fine once it's cooked and a little bit of the moisture has evaporated. So another layer of potatoes, more sauce. Another great thing about this format, whether you do it in individual or larger sizes, you can prepare the dish ahead of time, up to 48 hours, cover it and put it in the fridge, and then it'll be ready to bake whenever you're ready. A lot of times people think it takes too much effort. They won't bother making scallop potatoes, but I find that either making just 1 or 2 portions or making them ahead solves that problem. And now I'm starting to press the potatoes down a little. I want the layers to be nice and tight so that they cook thoroughly and evenly. We'll cheat and double up on this top layer. There we go. Oh, that's too thick. Try that one. A little bit more sauce. There we go. So now this is ready to go into the oven, or as I said, you could cover it and tuck it in the fridge for later. I like to put these little dishes on a baking tray so that they're easier to handle, and then I'm just going to cover it with foil. The reason for that is you want it to kind of almost steam a little bit with the cover on, so I'll cook it for 20 minutes with the cover on, and then I'll take that off and finish it so it starts to get a little bit golden on top. So into the oven we go with this. Okay, we have cooked our scallop potatoes. Look how fabulous they look. I love those little golden brown bits on top. The sauce has thickened up and it just looks so good. I can't wait to eat it. But I am going to finish it off, like I said, with a little more minced green onion. It can wake up the palate, and it also just makes the dish look pretty to have a garnish on top. And another trick, you can pre-bake these and put them in the fridge and cover and reheat them right before serving. So there's lots of flexible options here. I hope you enjoy these cheesy scallop potatoes as much as I do.
I adore making and eating biscuits, and playing around with new flavor combinations is always fun. Up next, I'm going to show you my new favorite biscuit. Of course, it has cheese in it, but there's also another very special ingredient.
I love pickles and I make and eat a lot of them. But a tip for you, when you're getting near the end of the jar, don't throw out that pickle brine. It has so many uses. You can add it to vinaigrettes to make salad dressings that pop, and you can even blanch vegetables and throw them in there and make new pickles. And of course, there's lots of cocktail options that also involve pickle juice. I really love biscuits. Proof? Go to my website, constantlycooking.com. There are so many different biscuit recipes. I grew up calling them tea biscuits, not sure why. Maybe they were meant to be served with tea. Baking powder biscuits is another name that's commonly known. So today we're going to make them with a twist. Of course, they have cheese in them, but also we're going to put in some chopped dill pickle. And let me tell you, the combo's amazing. So we've got our flour in the bowl already. We're going to add in our baking powder. And if you don't bake a lot, I highly recommend just buying the small canisters of baking powder. It does lose its oomph and your baked goods will not rise as thoroughly. So you're better off to get a smaller one and use it up. So just a little tip for you. A little bit of white sugar. I find that biscuits can taste bitter without that. And then for seasonings, we've got some minced onion, and I just started using this a few years ago. It adds such a great flavor, and you don't have to contend with that raw onion thing going on because it's nicely cooked and roasted. And some black pepper and a little bit of salt. There we go. So I'm just going to give that a stir. And then, like I showed on previous episodes, rather than trying to cut the butter in with a pastry cutter, I really like to grate it in with a box grater. So I've got some frozen butter here. And I always cut about a teaspoon more than I need so that I don't have to get down to the grating my knuckle stage of the process. Just to show you what this looks like, we've got nice, beautiful little shards of butter in here. And periodically, if you want to stop and toss them in with the flour, that helps coat them and keeps them from sticking together. I'm just going to stop and move this paper out because it's making my job harder than it needs to be. If you're wanting to do some prep ahead of time before you make these biscuits, they're really nice when they're baked up fresh. You can do all of this, mix the dry ingredients and grate the butter in, and then just set it aside, refrigerate it, or even freeze it until you're ready to proceed. I think that's as much as I can safely do without causing myself injury. So you just want to reach in and scrape out the shards that are in the grater. And the grating does take a few moments, but it is so much more efficient than scraping along with two knives or a pastry blender. And I'm just going to toss it. And if you can see in the camera, things are really nicely mixed. All right, so now we're going to add in our extras. We've got some grated cheddar cheese. I like to use a mixture of sharp and medium cheddar. If your family prefers mild cheddar, that's great. You could use mozzarella if you like. And of course, non-dairy cheese that is of that texture is also a great option. There's lactose-free, there's plant-based, all kinds of different cheeses today. And then the dill pickles that I mentioned. So you want to slice them up fairly small. And if you're a fan of sweet pickles or gherkins, those could be added in. I've made these biscuits with chopped olives, and they're also absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're not a pickle fan, just add the cheese and skip the pickles. In those go. And now we're going to add our milk. And again, non-dairy milk is a great option, whatever you prefer. You can even make these with water. I really like the flavor of milk. Sometimes I use buttermilk too. So we're just going to pour it in. You want to stir it fairly quickly, try and moistening all the dry ingredients. All right, it's looking pretty good. I could keep going inside the bowl here, but I find it easiest to transfer it to my work surface and then just kind of gather it together with my hands. You don't have to knead the dough per se, but you're just going to try and pull it together into a ball or a rectangle. And when we do that, we'll be able to incorporate the rest of the dry ingredients. One great thing about biscuits that I've learned is you can make the dough and cut the biscuits, whether you use a knife or biscuit cutter or even any kind of cookie cutter, and freeze them on a parchment lined tray for baking later. So what I do is freeze them till they're frozen solid, about 90 minutes or so, put them in a Ziploc bag or an airtight container, and then you can pull out as few or as many biscuits at a time as you like. So that's really handy if you enjoy them cooked up fresh like I do. Okay, we just have a little bit more work to get our dry ingredients mixed in. And if you find you're really struggling with this, I'm happy with how this is coming together, but if you find the process hard, you can always sprinkle a little bit more milk or water on top of the dough and work that in, and that will solve your problem. So I'm going to cut these with a knife today, so I'll have rough shaped squares. And the reason I like to do that is then I don't have any little bits left over, which happens with a circle cutter. You've got all your gaps, which you can re-roll, but this knife version is just easier. So you can see the studding of pickles looks so, so good. So here's my knife. So quick. I'm making them fairly small so that I have a lot of biscuits. And because there's still a little bit of flour on here, I'm going to transfer them to a clean baking sheet. I've crumpled the paper a little, as I like to do, so it will sit down in the pan. You want to space them about 1/2 inch to 1 inch, so just over 1 centimeter to 2.5 centimeters apart, so they have room to expand. These are really great with soup or even just as something to enjoy with cheese, although they already have cheese in them. We like them with chili, great even with charcuterie, really flexible, lots of options. And the other thing I like is that they cook really fast. They only take about 8 or 9 minutes. All right, I'm going to put this pan in the oven and I'll bring them back to you as soon as they are cooked. All right, I've taken our dill pickle and cheddar biscuits out of the oven, and don't they look fantastic? I love how much they puff up. I really like to serve them hot, 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 so I like to get them into the tray and onto the table as quickly as I can. This is a really flexible recipe. I talked about some other add-ins. Chopped pickled jalapenos would be another great one. Really any kind of savory accessory that you can think of. And of course, when I'm doing this, when no one's looking, I load up the tray, but there's always a couple left behind in the kitchen for me. We'll pop a couple more on top. so excited to tuck into these dill pickle biscuits.
My next recipe is based on something that was extremely popular at cocktail parties in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, but then fell out of favor. I say it's time to bring it back, with a few modern twists, of course.
I really do think it's time to bring back the cheese ball. Definitely underrated these days. Talk to kids in their 10s or 20s, they've never heard of them. So for my cheese ball, I'm gonna make it a little bit more flavorful than the ones I remember as a kid. Got some grated cheddar, again a mix of old and medium, because that's what I like. I'm gonna put in some goat cheese for a little more interest. I really like the tang of goat cheese. If you don't prefer that, you can just add 2 more tablespoons of cream cheese. And the cream cheese is great because it really gives the ball a good texture. When I was growing up, my mom made it with Velveeta, and sorry to all of you Velveeta fans out there, I'm not a fan. And then for some seasoning, I'm going to put in some oregano. It seems to be a flavor that everybody likes. You could add in different spices if that's what you prefer. Just a couple of shakes of Worcester. It's one of my go-tos for flavoring because it's quite complex. It adds what they call umami, which is just that subtle savory pop. Pepper. I find that the cheese is salty enough, so I don't need to add that. And then a couple of splashes of hot sauce, again, to just layer up the flavor a little bit more. So that's about all you need to do. You can make cheese balls in quite a significant quantity if you like, because they freeze really well, which I didn't know until I tried. I was telling someone earlier, we made these as portable pandemic cocktail snacks when we would drop off treats and then have Zoom cocktail parties with friends. So each household would get their own cheese ball and crackers, and it was really fun to be on screen eating the same thing at the same time. Because all the cheeses were at room temperature, you can see how easily they come together, and you just want to make sure the distribution is good. There's no big clumps of cheddar or clumps of cream cheese anywhere. I'm going to actually give it a little taste because I want to make sure that the seasoning is sufficient. I think that could use a little bit more. They can taste kind of bland if the only note that is prominent is the cheese, so that's why I encourage you to play around a little with the seasoning. And a bit more pepper. So the next step when you're making a cheese ball is you need to chill it. When I was growing up, they were always coated in chopped pecans, sometimes walnuts, but I'm going to make it a little more contemporary by coating our cheese ball with everything bagel seasoning blend. You can get this in lots of different stores and delis now. It's basically a mix of garlic flakes, sometimes onion flakes, pepper, salt, black and white sesame seeds, and it really plays nicely with the cheese. So we'll transfer it onto a sheet of plastic wrap. This I find is easier than parchment. If you're wondering why I'm such a big fan of parchment, I learned that it's compostable, so that makes me really happy to be putting it in my green bin. And it's much easier to shape this soft mixture into a ball when it's inside the wrap than trying to do it with your hands. So once we've done this, I'm going to pop it into the freezer for just about 3 or 4 minutes so it firms up a little bit, and then we're going to coat it in our everything bagel blend. So I'll be back in a few. All right, our cheese ball has had a nice little nap in the freezer, and now it's ready for the finishing touches. So I'm going to put some of this everything bagel spice in the bottom of this bowl. You want to make sure the bowl is broad enough to hold the cheese. And then unwrap it, and it is a slightly messy endeavor, but not too bad. And then just dunk it in there. And then with a spoon, you can shake and maybe use the spoon to guide it so you can coat the ball all the way around. The sesame seeds provide a really nice crunch, and then the other seasonings that are in there are really, really good. Now I'm just going to tip it up and kind of roll it. It's sort of like snowman making, except much more tasty. And then I'll just sprinkle on a little more. As I said, slightly messy, but it's well worth it. So at this stage, the ball would be ready to serve, or you can wrap it up in a clean sheet of plastic and refrigerate it for a couple of days, or freeze it for, I would say, at least a month. It'll be fine. So we're going to put that on our serving plate. See if I can get most of the seeds off my hands. And I like to have a fairly robust cracker with this because people really want to be able to spread it on there. So I like these artisanal crisps that you can get in a lot of different places. And the shape is really nice because it kind of mimics the shape of the cheese ball a little bit. And sometimes it's fun to make individual sized ones. I would make, say, 4 out of this recipe. And as a party appetizer, people could just pick up a plate with their own cheese ball and crackers and knife and enjoy it. So that's kind of fun too. All right, our everything bagel cheese ball is ready to be the party pleaser. I'm sure you'll agree that it's never a bad thing to add a little more cheese into your menus. Whether you try this beautiful everything bagel cheese ball, these fantastic dill pickle and cheddar biscuits, or this easy to make scalloped potatoes with cream cheese, I'm sure you're going to enjoy any or all of the recipes.